also what is the County Office of Education. So just very briefly, as County Superintendent of Schools, I have responsibility for the County Office of Education, but also by state mandate and by constitution, I'm responsible for all of the schools in Santa Clara County. Some of that responsibility is oversight and accountability for school budgets and local control accountability plans. And then there are a variety of other types of responsibilities that we have to provide training, support, monitoring, and other resources. So as county superintendent, I have quite a broad area of responsibility. County Offices of Education are an intermediate agency between local school districts and the state of California, California Department of Education. And we are both an oversight agency and a service providing agency. While a lot of our oversight is direct to the public schools, the public school districts, and the charter schools that are authorized by the County Board of Education, we have a responsibility to serve schools of all types, as well as parents, community, and other groups. So I welcome this opportunity to share with all of you about the 2020-2021 school year. And as we do our work together, and the way that I try to lead our office is through the lens of equity, diversity, inclusion, and partnership. And those are the core principles that drive our work and our decision making. A lot of our service recently has been very much anchored in response to COVID-19. We actually began our partnership with the Public Health Department well back into late December, early January, as we were starting to hear about COVID-19 across the world and anticipating a state of readiness for emergency preparedness in our own county and in our schools. One of the roles that the schools play is to help educate the community, and also often behavior change starts with children. And so a lot of our efforts early on were about educating our children and families about how to protect themselves and to stay healthy as we were learning about COVID-19. Since that time, we also have ramped up our partnerships and our work around decision making, deciding when schools would need to be closed, deciding the types of supports that schools and families were going to need in response to COVID, and also standing up contact tracing and testing availability into the community. One of the new requirements that the Public Health Department and the state have talked about is having more of our educators be tested on a more regular basis. As I mentioned, we do a lot of our work in partnership, and the way that our schools are supported in getting information about COVID-19 is through the County Offices of Education partnership with the Public Health Department. One of the things that we've heard a lot of questions about and concern and debate is around face coverings and the role that face coverings might play in a school setting. In our guidance, if there is any offering of in-person support, instruction, or service, there are requirements for face coverings, and the face coverings do vary based on a child's age. And there are some exclusions that would allow a person to not wear a face covering if they have a disability or if they have some other condition that would make face covering harmful. As we're thinking about the 2020-2021 school year, we began our planning based on some guiding principles and with our eye towards reopening schools to in-person instruction. Our number one guiding principle is the obvious one. It's all about health and safety. And our second, but equally important, is around equity, access, and inclusion. No matter how we're delivering our instruction, we need to understand that COVID-19 has inequitably and disproportionately impacted some individuals and some communities. And as we're planning for school offerings, we need to ensure our plans include that recognition. So as we think about schools, we also look to the science, and there have been a number of studies that have been done across the globe about the impact of COVID-19, and of most interest to school communities is its impact on children. Some of the recent studies indicated that the prevalence was lower for children, that younger children don't seem to be disease amplifiers of COVID-19, which is very different than how we have considered children traditionally with the flu, where with influenza, children are often amplifiers of the flu. There are constant emerging studies. This is obviously a novel disease that we don't know a lot about. And there's been a lot of research that, offers different opinions at different times. And we have heard recently that young children do seem to have the virus present, although it still appears to be true that they are not major spreaders as adults tend to be. We also keep track of the data, and we share this information with our school communities. This data is available from the Public Health Department. And these snapshots of data have helped us understand the way that COVID is presenting in the community and how it's impacting different age groups. And really, we just use this information for observational purposes, not really for decision making. We don't have the capacity to interpret the data at the deepest level necessary. So it's really more to look at trends and to observe what's happening with COVID-19 in our community. COVID-19 has had a significant impact on schools and on children. We're seeing a lot of trauma, impact, and grief, significant learning loss due to disruption in education, limited access to services, largely because of the digital divide and lack of access to the internet, and children, especially middle school and high school children, experiencing and reporting large degrees of feeling socially isolated. In the spring and March, we had to make the decision to close our schools, which we thought would be a short-term closure. And as you all know, that continued all the way into the end of the school year with our schools operating in distance learning only. It has also disrupted medical and healthcare routines such that children are off track for their immunizations. And we're also seeing that their need for routine hearing checks, dental, hygiene checks, routine medical care has also fallen off. So we have some concerns about just the health and well-being of children as a result of COVID, even though those would not be direct impacts of COVID-19, more indirect. And children have also been separated from a lot of the clubs, sports, services, and other things that they would routinely do. And there's been a large shift to all providers trying to figure out how to do what they do best, but doing it in an online and virtual offering. The tools that we use to guide our plans for the 2020-21 school year are those provided by the California Department of Education, and these are linked on the slide, so if anyone has deep interest, we can share these with you so you can review them more. And then also our local public health department provides schools and school-based program, very specific guidance. And then our County Office of Education has planning templates and other tools to support recovery and reopening. The keys to reopening to in-person instruction have to do with a lot of factors that are really controlled more by funding and the public health department. In order for schools to offer in-person instruction, we need to have availability for robust contact tracing and case investigation, the ability to isolate and quarantine quickly and effectively to control the virus spread. We need significant access to PPE, and we need to have testing available and in a way in which we get the results back in a very time-sensitive manner. We were on track with some various levels of in-person instruction being planned by our schools and school communities throughout the county of Santa Clara. And then on July 17th, Friday, July 17th, the governor released, in partnership with the California Department of Public Health, school sector specific guidelines. Those guidelines took into account the local disease trends and was partly in response to questions and urging from the field for the governor to set metrics about when schools could reopen. The criteria that was released that schools and school districts could reopen for in-person instruction in any county in the state of California at any time if they were in a county that was not on the state's monitoring list for COVID-19 in the prior 14 days. So what that meant for Santa Clara County, we happened to be on the monitoring list on the day that the announcement was made, and therefore no school in Santa Clara County could reopen to in-person instruction as a result of the governor's announcement on July 17th. There are 5 criteria that have been laid out for schools, and just to clarify, this criteria applies to all schools: public, traditional public schools, charter schools, and private schools. And that in-person instruction decisions would be made on local health data. So that would be our county public health data. So all, as I mentioned, our schools are closed to in-person instruction, and we would be unable to reopen to in-person until our county has been off the monitoring list for 14 consecutive days. We have bounced on and off the monitoring list since the list was established. And there are some who theorize that it could be quite some time, months, potentially years, before we would be off the monitoring list for 14 consecutive days. There is a single exception that the governor announced. That single exception for a county like ours was to allow elementary schools to reopen to in-person instruction if they're granted a waiver by their local public health department. So the waiver process works by the superintendent of the school district or the equivalent in a charter school or private school, initiating a request to our local public health and county office schools team, requesting information about the waiver, and then the process can begin. Before applying, there is a requirement to consult with labor or workforce, parents, and community organizations. And then, as I mentioned, the next step would be to reach out to our schools at eoc.scc.gov.org. It's important to note that the only person authorized to initiate the waiver request is the district superintendent or the equivalent in a charter school or private school. The other parts of the governor's plan included strong mask requirements, physical distancing requirements, and with some adaptations, and then some ideas around what regular testing and dedicated contact tracing could look like if there would be an outbreak at a school. And then the most important component of his plan was a shift in thinking about distance learning. In June, when they announced the budget requirements really were heavy on requiring in-person instruction and making it more difficult for a district to choose distance learning. In July, that all shifted, and now the expectations are for distance learning, but with some rigorous standards, including daily live interaction for every child with their teacher and other students. So this is a major shift away from the way that much of distance learning was provided in the spring. The other requirement is that parents should expect that their children are receiving class assignments and class work similar to or on par to what they would have received had they been in the classroom for in-person instruction. These requirements for distance learning are built into some of the budget, and we're still waiting to hear more about what the audit requirements will be for schools. But these requirements are quite significant, and schools will have to document their efforts to do this work. And as a result, many districts are looking more to learning management systems and learning platforms that are really well situated to support distance learning. In the spring, a lot of our schools made immediate, urgent decisions, again, thinking that it would be short term. But now that we know that we're going to be in this for a longer term, there's been a shift to using more learning management systems or platforms. We released some grant opportunities to our schools last spring in partnership with the Silicon Valley Community Foundation. And really, I share this information to let you know that a lot of what we dealt with in terms of need in the spring will persist into the coming school year. So there will be an ongoing need for distance learning. We know that there will also need to be some considerations for childcare, as many families who were counting on schools reopening to in-person will, so that they can work, will have a new need or an ongoing need for childcare. Schools will also be required to provide meal service. And as I mentioned, we're seeing a lot of need for social and emotional health and well-being services. A new thing that emerged was for parent engagement and support with distance learning. A lot of our families reported that they didn't have the technical skills or resources or understanding or even the mindset to support distance learning successfully in their homes. And we're seeing that this is continuing to be a need, both with just getting connected to the internet, knowing how to stay safe on the internet, knowing how to monitor their students appropriately, and what to do when they have issues like broadband that kicks them off, or lessons and materials that don't load properly. So again, I mentioned Community Foundation stepped up in partnership, and we do have an ongoing partnership with them to try to address some of those needs. And there were some other projects that, in response to that the Silicon Valley Community Foundation has helped to support, including the Child Care Project to address some of the needs of emergency child care providers. And then the Regional Nonprofit Emergency Fund, which provides similar supports as our education fund, but serves our charter schools. So at this time, I'd like to stop, and I'd be very interested in engaging with you in some conversation and perhaps some questions that you may have.
I can start, I guess. I know at my school, it's been challenging. Faculty development around these new tools isn't easy. So perhaps you could comment on how the faculty are doing.
I have to give a lot of credit to our teachers. You know, if just, you can all imagine, you're in your classroom on Friday, and then Monday, you're doing distance learning, thinking it's for a couple weeks, and then it becomes, you don't go back to your classroom and you're doing distance learning for the rest of the school year. So quite a heroic effort on the part of many of our family, or many of our educators, who also, many of them have children of their own, and we're attempting to work from home and manage childcare needs too. So there have been a lot of efforts since spring for teachers to get retooled on their skills, a lot of professional development and training provided by a number of entities, including the county office, a lot of our school districts, San Jose State University, the California Department of Education, and the California Collaborative for Educational Excellence have all been providing technical assistance, training, and PD to our teachers. I hear from our teachers, they say, we're ready. We want our parents to understand that we get that what we did last spring wasn't the best that could be done in public education and in our schools. And we take that seriously, and we're committed to a more robust distance learning offering this coming year. But the teachers are stressed. Teachers are also telling us about some of their fears around COVID-19 and the ability to stay healthy during widespread community spread of COVID.
Just reading through the chat here, one question: how can parents support distance learning? Can they volunteer to run breakout sessions during the day, tech support for teachers, that sort of thing?
I do think that parents could volunteer and assist in those ways with their teacher or with their local principal. There are some things we're still learning about this virtual platform that relate to student privacy, and also just how to manage the different parties who may be participating. And one of the challenges with the breakouts is supervision, how the teacher can provide the same level of supervision or oversight when they're not physically present in the breakout room. So there are some challenges to work out, but I think that there are also opportunities.
Another question about how are we providing for special needs students?
So the current understanding of the guidance is that in-person instruction is prohibited unless there's a waiver. However, we do understand that for students with disabilities, the online platforms may not be working well, and there are just, quite frankly, some services that can only be done in person. So we are still working through with the state to see what may be possible, if it could be possible to do some of those in-person offerings if we had the right level of PPE, for example, for our providers and for workforce. We do know that the requirements mean that schools will have to do some targeted intervention for students with disabilities and for English language learners. And what that might look like, even in a virtual world, may mean one-to-one with their teacher or with a tutor. It may mean additional access to telehealth or telecounseling services or teleservices. And it may also mean additional supports, materials, and resources that are provided to the parent for use at home with the children.
Thank you.
Dr. Dewan. Oh, Laura.
Go ahead, Manny. I was just going to say there's a lot of resources being posted up here in the chat for those who want to look.
Right, and that was going to be my next question. Dr. Dewan, as you know, we're a business organization. How can we be of help during this time with you? And it's pretty obvious to me that we're going to be in this mode on distance learning for quite some time. Who knows how long? And you're going to need more help, more resources for our schools and everything else that's involved. How are you reaching out to the private sector here in Silicon Valley to help you to help get those additional resources? And the other question that I would have for you also is the state of California. As you know, when they passed their budget last month, they knew that they're going to have to probably go back probably next month once they know how much revenue is going to be coming in. And that's going to have another impact to the schools and their budgets. And even though they're, based on what I heard yesterday, there's a little bit more they have projected, but still it's going to be a deficit. So what is our county, especially with all the schools, what are we doing to try to get ahead of that on the advocacy part in Sacramento? And how are you, or how can SPLP, partner with you, help you in your efforts?
I really appreciate that question because we do need help. As you described it, the budget is balanced with the idea that schools would be managing what's called deferrals. So that's where the state promises the funding, but you have to wait for it until the next quarter or the next budget. That creates a lot of cash flow challenges for schools. And a lot of our schools are very concerned about how the deferrals are going to impact their ability to have a balanced budget and to meet all the needs. Also, the governor has said, that in his efforts to balance the budget and to keep funding in schools, he did what's called a hold harmless. So he's basically saying that the ADA that the school had this past year will be the average daily attendance rate that will be used for the current year budget. In a way that's really positive, because we know that school enrollments were significantly impacted by COVID, and also attendance and engagement was down. And so if we were going to go into a disruptive school year, we know that that would have been a problem for funding. The downside of that is that in those rare instances where a school might have higher enrollment or higher attendance in the coming year than they would have had last year, they are also held at this current year's funding level. So, so that's one challenge that schools will be facing. And I think the other is that there's some perception in the governor's message that schools would somehow be responsible for the digital divide, that they would somehow be responsible for providing devices and hotspots and internet connectivity and infrastructure and whatever it's going to take to connect all our families. And quite frankly, that is not a problem our schools can solve alone. And this opportunity to share that information with all of you is important to me, because as our private partners, I think there's a lot that can be done to support digital access, equity, and inclusion on behalf of the private sector. Device donation drives, donation of funds to some of our things, partnering with us to help figure out long-term infrastructure solutions, and other creative ways that we can help ensure our children get connected and stay connected to the level of broadband access that will support the learning platforms necessary for live instruction. And then I think too, just really keeping aware of the need for health and safety, and supporting our schools as we're implementing a lot of these safety standards, I think is going to be really key.
Dewan, a couple of more comments here in the chat. One relates to, I think, communication with the private schools and the charter schools. One question is, do you know if the county is going to mandate all schools in the county to do distance learning at the start of the school? Apparently this particular school isn't aware or hasn't announced. And I heard you, I think, say that the state mandate is that. So how are you communicating with other schools in the county?
It is the state mandate, effective July 17th. That was announced by the governor, that it applies to public, charter, and private schools. Additionally, our county issued an industry-specific directive for schools. That is posted on the Public Health Department website. It may also be on ours. And we also held an informational meeting and invited all of the leaders from the public schools, private schools, and others to attend. And so that information is in writing. I'd also be happy to share it with Stephen so it can be shared with this group. But the industry-specific guidance for schools in Santa Clara County directs them to open and distance learning.
Another question, how can we better use the schools as in the physical property? So perhaps, for example, for childcare, private sector kind of childcare, that sort of thing. Has there been thought in that regard?
I do think there are some opportunities there. I think that, as I mentioned, the need for childcare will continue, and the possibility for partnership with the district, in particular, if that partnership may allow employees to access that, or the families within that community to access it, then the school site may be a viable space. There are some health and safety considerations, and I think some things that would have to be worked out around liability. A lot of the concern that schools, businesses, and others have right now is really anchored in a lack of clarity about liability if COVID-19 is an outbreak in that setting.
Also, I think part of that comment was directed at parents and families who maybe can't afford the for-profit childcare resources, and maybe this could be something that might be county resources or nonprofit resources might be directed toward.
I think that is true, and we did see even in the spring there were a couple of partnerships that emerged to offer low or no cost childcare. In fact, a number of employers helped in those partnerships where perhaps they covered the cost of some of the childcare spaces for their employees.
Another question, how much, this is a good one, how much of the county student population does not have access to devices or the internet?
So we have different data from different points of time on that. It's about 10% of the households in Santa Clara County did not have access to broadband. However, it's about 15,000 households that had neither a device or hotspot to connect. That was back in the spring, so that was like our most urgent need was to address those 15,000 households. The challenge is that the number is likely larger than that. And the reason that the number is larger is when we inventory the needs of our families and we ask, do you have a device? Many of them say yes. And they say yes because they have a phone. What we learned is that the phone doesn't work for distance learning. It doesn't work if you have one phone and 3 or 4 children trying to do their schoolwork all at the same time. And so we know that the need is actually much larger. So our recent device inventory was about 11,000 hotspots were needed, and about 50,000 devices are still needed in Santa Clara County.
Lots of additional questions. What about teacher credentialing and assuring the pipeline of new teachers? How are the supervised student teaching protocols working?
So some of our partners have been very successful in continuing to provide student teaching. Obviously, it's distance learning that they're participating in, but they're still being assigned and matched with their teachers and still participating in distance learning and earning their teacher credential. And there were also some changes made at the state level to accommodate for some of the testing requirements and some of the other concerns around teacher credentialing.
Another question about the policy for truancy, especially considering families who now rely on the children for childcare since they're at home. How does this play into the synchronous learning model outlined earlier?
So the new state requirements would require that the school has to follow up with students who are disengaged or not participating in the learning platform. And so it's not necessarily being characterized as truancy or from a discipline standpoint on behalf of the child or their family, but really more a responsibility of the district or the school to re-engage with the family, try to solve whatever problem the family may have so that the student can more richly participate, or to identify an alternative learning plan so that the student would not be negatively impacted and suffer learning loss.
So tons of questions, Manny. I don't want to take away from, you may have some policy questions that you want to squeeze in as well.
Sure. Thank you, Laura. Dr. Dewan, have you been working very closely with the Eastside Alliance? This is the, I think, 8 or 9 school districts in Central East San Jose on this issue?
Yes, yes, we do work very closely with the Eastside Alliance on a number of these issues, including that, you know, we provide professional development and technical assistance to them and help to partner with them on some of the digital divide and digital access needs.
I'm not aware of any kind of county-wide task force on education dealing with this COVID crisis. Is there anything out there like that as far as trying to partner and trying to do more advocacy and trying to bring more help and support and trying to deal with what's going to happen later with the state budget issue that's going to be coming up? Is there any talk out there trying to, you know, do more working together in partnership with the private and sector as well?
That is an excellent recommendation and one that I would embrace. I would say there really hasn't been like a single task force just focused on education in the way that you're describing. We have a number of task force and work groups who are operationalizing the public health guidance and providing technical assistance, but the advocacy piece has not yet been a part of our sustained response. And it's something I'd be very interested in talking with you more about how we could set up.
I'll be more than happy to work with you on Dr. Wynn. I do a lot of work at the state capitol, so I'm pretty familiar with what's going on over there. But we'll follow up that afterwards.
Thank you. I very much appreciate that. As you can imagine, with COVID-19 since March, we were an urgent emergency response immediately, and we've had a lot of ups and downs and changes in terms of guidance and requirements. And a lot of our effort was just emergency and urgent response. Just recently, we were able to transition into what we call our sustained response period, where we're sustaining some of the efforts that we put in place on contact tracing and testing availability, guidance documents, and more. But now that we know, as I said, that we'll be in this mode for quite some time, I think we're getting more ready for those longer term task force efforts.
Oh, thank you. Stephen, this question is for you and obviously the leadership of SCO. I think that I'd like to recommend to our committee and to my co-chair here, Laura, that we have a discussion with the leadership of SBO to see how much more, you know, we can help in this whole effort in partnership on the education side here in our county. Not only obviously with our county office for education with our superintendent here, but also looking at working with other strategic partners here on the private sector. So I'd like to throw that out, Stephen. If you can talk to your folks and see, you know, maybe we can have our own internal discussion, obviously, from our committee with your folks, Stephen, and see how SBO can kind of, you know, get more involved in this whole effort. Because my gut tells me is we're going to have to do a lot more coordination, more help, more resources here. And here in Silicon Valley, I got to believe that there's other resources that we can tap into, especially from the private sector, that can help our kids in our schools out here in Silicon Valley.
And if we needed a place to focus, I would really urge collaboration. And if you wanted to join in our efforts on the digital divide, that would just be amazing. The need is so significant. And we've been working on digital divide in our community for 10 years. And it's only been recently that this pandemic has pulled us together enough to get some much needed early investment. But the need is so great. And the need also means that we need to be planning for the next few years of implementation, not just the next few weeks. And so I would very much welcome a partnership and having you all join in with us in that planning and the advocacy on the digital divide.
Thank you. And I also got something here from the chat saying that we obviously need to include our nonprofits here which are very good on the education side. So they would be part of, I think, of this whole discussion.
Yeah,
If I
Chair.
might-
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Stephen, if I might address Carol's question about social emotional learning. The teachers are accountable for teaching the curriculum. And we also do recognize that our families have experienced a lot of trauma. And so our teachers are also receiving some supports on how to address the social emotional needs and wellness needs of students, and how to be trauma informed and create that space in a virtual classroom.
And my comment was to your previous recommendation, Chair Diaz. And it's like you're reading our minds right now, because we were just having an internal discussion about, you know, how the SVO can help out. And I think sometime soon we'll have an internal discussion about, you know, how we could, you know, give back to education. And we'd be more than happy to reach out to you and the committee afterwards and just let you know some things that we've brainstormed.
Thank you.
Interesting question about testing and tracing. Will testing be required for children if there is a positive case in their class or school? I think this is a lot about sort of going back into the classroom. If there's a vaccine, will it be required before a child can come back to school? And how is testing being conducted for teachers? So I'm sure there's a lot of planning going along with when we come back, how will that work?
Yes, thanks, Laura. All of the templates and protocols, flowcharts around when a student or an employee would need to be tested are being rolled out in the coming weeks. So we've just recently finalized those and we'll begin training around them. I'm not prepared yet to address the specifics of when children would be tested, but for the educators, employees, if they have been in a close contact with a positive case, they will need to be tested. They'll be referred for testing. And then there's also other times when the school employee may also be required to test. And the current state and county guidelines also have recommendations about surveillance testing, which means that we would have some way that employees are tested on a more regular basis, not just around an outbreak or contact with a positive case. And then contact tracing is currently being done by the contact tracing team at the Public Health Department. When there's a positive case, the team works to identify sometimes with the employer or others. In our case, it would be with the school site, who some of the close contacts have been of the positive case. And then outreach is done to those individuals to let them know about the isolation or quarantine requirements and the availability of testing.
I know we're running short on time. There's one question that was earlier in the chat, and I don't want to miss it because it's near and dear to my heart, and that is about social justice issues and whether the county is considering anti-bias curricula, how those issues are being addressed.
We do have a number of resources and other work that we've been doing around race, equity, and social justice, including anti-bias and anti-racism training and courses. Additionally, implicit bias has been a training protocol that we've had for a couple of years, and I think a lot of renewed interest in ensuring that as a foundational support. And then our history and social studies department here at the County Office of Education has partnered with San Jose State University, and we're launching a social justice referenced ethnic studies community of practice. And through the work in the Ethnic Studies department, they're able to address some of the race equity issues and connect it into the history and social studies framework for K-12 lens.
Very good. Stephen, I know I want to be respectful of time. I know you have a little bit of a wrap up to do. Always more questions coming in, but I'll defer to you.
Oh, thank you very much, Chair Palazzolo. Yeah, this has been a great discussion, and I think the number of questions and how engaged people are in the chat, both privately and in the general chat, really show just how interested people are. I know that because there are so many questions, is there a way for people to contact you, Dr. Dewan, to kind of, in case they have questions unanswered or are curious about something, what would be the best way to ask you?
Certainly, you're welcome to share my email address. I also think it could be helpful if you think that as a group you wanted to submit questions perhaps to Stephen, and then could have a collated list, and then I could ensure some follow-up with some answers in writing that may be more effective. I'm sure all of you may imagine a very full inbox of a county superintendent, but I would do my best to recognize your emails and attempt to respond, but I would be very open to, if you wanted to collaborate and pull some questions together, our team here would be very responsive to this.
Yes, and Jamie from your team, Dr. Dewan, has done a great job in coordinating and being the connector between your office and us. So we have no doubt that we can work on that. And if you do have questions, yes, please do feel free to email me, and then that way I can compile them all and then relay that to Dr. Dewan's office, just so that, like she said, getting tons of emails from all different sources, it would probably be best to do that. So I really do apologize to the people that we didn't get to, because there's so many great questions in all regards to special education. And if there are any final comments from our co-chairs, from Dr. Dewan, I know I want to be mindful of everyone's time and end at 11. So if there are any final comments anyone would like to make, please feel free to do so.
Stephen, I'll just make a couple of final comments. So thank you for that. I think that I may have failed to mention that on our website, we do have a lot of information about schools, and particularly related to COVID-19, as well as to the digital divide. So I will send you the links to those sites. There's FAQs included there, a lot of information about the public health guidance and its impact on the schools. And then I just want to thank you so much for the opportunity to be with you today. I'd be happy to come back anytime that you would like. And I also wanted to say, I noticed in the pictures a lot of colleagues and friends and partners that we have with the county office. And I just wanted to say hello to all of you who I've already met, and thank you for joining the meeting today as well.
All right, well, it looks like we still have 2 minutes in time. If there's any, from our co-chairs, if there are any comments or questions they'd like to, real brief before we end this.
From me, just a huge thank you to the superintendent and to all of your colleagues and teachers who are going above and beyond trying to make this work in difficult circumstances. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ditto.
All right, well, thank you very much to everyone who attended. Special thanks to Dr. Dewan and our committee co-chairs, and thank you to everyone who's posting resources. Really appreciate it. We need those more now than ever, and we hope to keep in touch with you through email. You know how you can contact me. It's in the chat box. So I will, would it be okay if we adjourn this meeting, Chair Diaz and Chair Palazzolo?
Indeed, yes.
All right, well, meeting
Thank you.
adjourned. I'll stick around just so that people can look through the chat box if they want, but Meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.